Marshall Holman had a fantastic career from the mid-70s all the way to the late 80s, and he's one of the best players we've seen on the PBA Tour. He won 22 titles, including 4 majors, and was the first player to surpass $1.5 million in PBA earnings. But perhaps he's best known for his fiery demeanour and his interesting temperament, but that was just part of what made him the player he was. People remember the time he double-gutted on TV and when he kicked the foul light out in frustration just as much as they remember his major triumphs. It was all a part of his colourful character that made him must-watch whenever he made a telecast. Holman had almost 13 years at the top of the PBA, but what happened after that? Because there was a very sharp decline that saw him really struggle on the tour in the last few years of his pro career. In this video, I'm going to look at Holman's career from the very start, study his highs, but also the lows, and talk about exactly what happened to Marshall Holman. Let's start from the beginning, when he was trying to make it as a pro. He had moved to Medford, Oregon when he was just a small child, and there wasn't exactly a huge tournament scene there. So when Holman wanted to try and improve his skills, he had to travel to Seattle and Portland mainly to compete. And although he was able to compete with some of the best in the game, the idea of him becoming a pro wasn't really on his radar because he felt he wasn't good enough. But he would eventually find his way onto the tour, and he hit the ground running, having 2 top 5 finishes in 1974 and then winning his first 2 titles in 1975. Part of the reason he had success so quickly was that his game just suited the conditions of the time. He said himself that if you wanted to design a pro bowler to combat the conditions of the mid-70s, you would have made me. Many players would come onto the tour and had to adjust their games to match the conditions. He went on to say that I went on tour and didn't have to change a thing. I just bowled like I bowled. This was obviously a huge advantage for him as there was no adjustment period needed. He didn't need time to get used to the tour particularly or the conditions, he just came in and did what he did best. Obviously that comes down to being in the right place at the right time, but of course he still had to put in the performances and get the job done on TV, and that's exactly what happened. He became the youngest winner at the Tournament of Champions when he won the 1976 event when he was just 21 years old. That record would stand all the way until 2016 when it was finally beaten by Jesper Svensson, who won as a 20-year-old. In the next 3 years, Holman would continue to rack up the titles in a very short period of time, and in 1979 he became the youngest bowler in history at 24 years, 274 days to reach 10 PBA titles, although that record would later be broken by Pete Weber in 1987. 1979 was clearly his best year by far as he won 4 titles in total. In just 4 years, he'd established himself as one of the best on the tour and one of the most talented young players the tour had ever seen. And I think this is what was so impressive. He was doing all of this at such a young age. However, in 1980, there was a little blip in his career as he didn't win a single title that year. This was largely due to the fact that during a telecast in June of 1980, he kicked and broke the foul light out of pure frustration. He was subsequently fined $2,500 and given a 10-tournament suspension. But this little setback didn't last long as he came back strong in 1981, winning 3 titles and his second major, the US Open, where he managed to defeat friend and doubles partner Mark Roth in the title match. He would continue to win regularly throughout the 80s, including 2 majors, and that was despite the changes that were happening in the game at the time. The introduction of urethane bowling balls had hindered some players as they had to learn to adjust, but it didn't seem to affect Holman. Where things started to really dip for him is towards the late 80s. In 1987, he had probably one of his best years, but he didn't win a title. His earnings were over $152,000. He had numerous top 5 finishes. He had the highest average on tour, and he finished first on the PBA points list. And because of all of this, he was voted as the PBA Player of the Year, although it would have been a disappointment despite it being a great season from him from a statistical point of view. Not winning a title was obviously a big disappointment. But this year can really be marked as the beginning of the end for Holman, because although he won one title the following year in 1988, he then stopped winning completely and did not win another title until 1996. So what on earth happened? Why did he suddenly drop off like this? Well, it was in fact the introduction of reactive resin bowling balls at the start of the 90s that really did it for him. And that's something that Holman spoke about. He said that the reason for this slump was my inability to adjust to the reactive equipment. Previously, I never had to adjust to anything. Although I would say that last part is not strictly true because he did have to adjust to urethane. He went on to say, I was always trying to get my ball through the front of the lane, then make it hit on the back. With reactives, you had to look at a point down the lane and ask yourself, how do I get the ball to that break point and still have effective roll into the pocket? My brain could never see that, and I didn't work hard enough to learn how to do it, so my game just fell backwards. So you can clearly see that he feels that the introduction of reactive balls really spelled the end for him. But despite these struggles to adapt, his average on the tour was basically the same. The problem was, he stayed the same, but everyone else overtook him. Many of the other players' averages jumped, and Holman always had an advantage in the past because it was a similar situation to Mark Roth. Both of these players had an edge and they relied on their hitting power, but as soon as the equipment changed, the edge was totally gone. All the other players, because of reactive balls, were able to start to catch up and then surpass these type of players who had dominated in the 70s and early 80s. Another factor for the downfall of his career was the young power players who were bursting onto the scene. Players like Pete Weber, Mike Albee, Amleto Monicelli, they were dominating the tour, and these young players brought so much more power into the game that nobody had ever seen. And then when you combine that with the new reactive balls, Holman was just left behind because he wasn't able to adapt. His career was suddenly in free fall and it just got worse and worse, and he started to consider what was next, as it became apparent his pro career had essentially come to an end. I mean, by 1994 he was 40, so it was naturally a reasonable question to ask, although I still maintain that 40 in bowling is not old, and many players have had big resurgences in their careers in their 40s. Finally, in 1996, the answer arrived. Holman, Brian Voss and Mike Albee were approached about the ESPN colour commentator job. Holman had told ESPN that he felt that he both had the tools and skills to do the job well, but he also said that Voss and Albee were still at the top of their games, so their availability could be limited every time they were making telecasts. But he assured ESPN that would not be the case with him. ESPN decided to go ahead and give him the job. But interestingly, Holman's promise was broken pretty much straight away. In fact, it was the third week of the season when he made the telecast and actually went on to win the tournament. This is absolutely fascinating that after an 8-year title drought, he wins the title out of nowhere after getting a commentator job. After Holman converted the 10th frame spare to secure the victory, he exclaimed, "I'm back, baby, I'm back." However, this would unfortunately be his last title on tour as well as his last appearance in the televised finals. And although it was his last title, it felt almost fated with the way the situation went with the commentator's job, but it was a nice way for him to go out. He would continue his role as commentator for many years on PBA telecasts and also do a lot of commentating on the women's tour as well. He would continue to bowl in senior events over the years, but he indicated in 2017 that he had retired from all competitive bowling and did not expect to participate in any more senior PBA events. Holman's legacy in the game is incredible. He's a player that will always be remembered. He was a bit of a divisive figure that divided opinion. Some fans loved him, some hated him. He just had that sort of character on the lanes. His performances in doubles events as well with Mark Roth have gone down in history, with the Roth-Holman doubles tournament still running in their name to honour their achievements. Holman had come onto the tour as an exciting young player and really took it by storm. He carved out an amazing career for himself well into the late 80s. Unfortunately, it was the introduction of reactive bowling balls that really helped to bring his career to a close. But as I said, he went out in style, winning his final title in 1996. And so that brings us to an end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this one. I think it's always nice I personally enjoy looking back at the history of these players, looking at how their careers started, the ups and downs of their careers, and ultimately how their careers ended. This was a bit of a similar story to somebody like Mark Roth, who just fell off at the time when urethane and then reactive bowling balls were brought in. But if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like this, then please let me know some suggestions for some other players that you'd like me to do this kind of video for. And if you have enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. Well, that's going to do it from me for today, and as always, thank you bowling fans, and see you all next time.